Assalamu alaikum to all who have joined us so far. And first of all, uh, uh, I want to give my vote of thanks first to Professor Moosa, Ahmet, and Mustafa Akyol, my very good friends, for sacrificing the early morning time today on a Sunday, that too, and joining us. That shows the commitment for a cause. Thank you so much, first of all. And friends, as you know, this is the hottest topic today anywhere in the world. Blasphemy actually came into focus in Muslim nations when Asia Bibi in 2010 was convicted of the offense under the Pakistan's draconian 295C of the Pakistan Penal Code. She was convicted of blasphemy and was sentenced to death by hanging. And but then later on in 2018, after a series of court cases and fights, she was finally acquitted by the Pakistani Supreme Court. But before that, a lot happened in Pakistan. Salman Taseer first, he tried to tried to speak against the blasphemy laws of Pakistan and wanted them amended at least, and for which his own bodyguard, Mumtaz Khadri, killed him, for which he was eulogized and glorified when he was hanged finally in 2016. There were thousands of mourners in the funeral procession, and these people glorified him, and they actually they almost made him into a saint. And soon after that, Shehbaz Bhatti, the minorities minister of Pakistan, was gunned down for the same crime, because he defended Asia Bibi and questioned the Pakistan's blasphemy law. And much before that, there was another judge of the Lahore High Court, Iqbal Bhatti, that he had acquitted two more Christians in 1995 who were accused of blasphemy. So what happened in 1997? He was shot dead. So judges, High Court judges were shot, governors were shot, ministers were shot. And more recently, there was another case in July this month where another person accused. All these cases are of blasphemy are completely false cases, concocted, fabricated cases for other reasons, just to put them in place. And this man, who was when he was brought to the court for trial, another fanatic shot him dead within the court. And again, the killer was glorified. The killer was eulogized. That was in July, hardly a few months ago. And then a couple of days back in Bangladesh, another person was killed and burnt for the alleged desecration of the Quran. So as you can see in the Muslim world, there has been a tendency to just eliminate people, to kill people in the name of Islam. Again, in the name of a prophet who has been called in the Quran as Rahmatul lil Alameen, embodiment of compassion for the entire humanity. It's surprising, and it is in this context we have to see the Paris killing, the beheading of Samuel Paty in Paris, the brutal beheading. There is no question of justifying it in any way. We have to condemn that, and precisely for that reason, this meeting has been called, and we are here to condemn that and unequivocally, without any reservation. That was a brutal crime against humanity, against Islam. It has to be condemned outright. No questions about that. We can't differ that. But at the same time, we have to also look at the other voices that are coming from the Muslim world. Some of them are saying that the West has double standards. They have different set of laws for the communities. For instance, what do you call Holocaust denial is a crime in 16 European nations. You can go to jail for even killed by the horrific Nazi genocide against the Jews after the World War II. So therefore, they are questioning that why can't the same protection be given to all prophets, not just Prophet Muhammad, but all religious personages. So this is a debate which we thought we can discuss. We are here first to condemn that, not just the killing of Patty and subsequently 3 more people were knifed to death in a church in Nice. and we condemn that too without any reservation and unequivocally. Our forum, the Forum for Islamic Forum for the Promotion of Thought, stands against all these crimes, and we come out in complete condemnation of these acts. But we are going to discuss a wider picture apart from condemning these things. So that's why when I call Professor Moosa, Professor Akyol, and Professor Ahmet, my very good friends in the USA, they readily agreed, and here we are. So as I just said, the format of today's talk is Professor Moosa would speak for 10 minutes. After this, just to introduce Professor Moosa, he's the Mirza Family Professor of Islamic Thought and Muslim Societies at the University of Notre Dame, Notre Dame's Keough School of Global Affairs and Department of History, Indiana, USA. And then Mustafa Akyol is a Senior Fellow at Cato Institute's Center for Global Liberty and Prosperity, Washington, D.C. Then we have Ahmet Kuru, my very good friend, who's a Porteous Professor of Political Science, San Diego State University, California. These are top scholars on this subject. Ahmet Kuru's recent book, which tried to find a nexus between the ulama and the state, is very central to this theme of blasphemy today. I'm sure, I mean, he will be making some very important points today. And Professor Moosa himself has written a very interesting book on madrasas. So again, all this thought emanate from madrasas sometimes. So therefore, Professor Moosa will also discuss from that point in time. And Ahmed also has written a very interesting book, which is going to be soon published on, I think the title of the book, if I'm not wrong, I'm trying to locate the title. It is Reopening Muslim Minds. So that's a very important time. So title. So
and it's Mustafa. It's not Ahmed.
Yeah. That's not Ahmed.
You mean
Mustafa's book.
Yeah, you can attribute all. You can give all Mustafa's books to me also. That's fine. Yeah. You can say I wrote.
Great. So that's how it is. So therefore, I don't want to take much of time introduction. We know all these top scholars. They are very important voices in India. They are very important voices in India, and I mean in the world today on Islam. So we look forward to listening to them. Over to you, Professor Moosa, first.
Thank you. Good evening. Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, Brother Faiz, for this opportunity to talk to your colleagues and your friends around the world. I'm absolutely delighted to be on the same panel with Dr. Ahmet Kuru and Dr. Mustafa Akyol. I look forward to hearing their views. First of all, I think that this question of blasphemy is a topic that Muslims have been struggling with for many decades, and it confronts Muslim societies, global societies in different ways. I think that, if you ask anybody, what is the Islamic view on insult to the Prophet? Most people won't know, but if they hear that someone had insulted, if you ask a Muslim that someone had insulted the Prophet, they feel very injured. Their emotions will be injured. So will be people of any other religion. If you insult the deities, if you insult the sacred personages, people will feel deeply aggrieved and pained. And in the Quran, we are instructed and told that do not insult the deities of others, because that will generate a response, and then others will then insult your deity. And this idea of insulting each other's deities results in social and psychological injury for people who deem certain objects, certain personages to be sacred and to be holy and to be of meaning and value to them. So this question has been around for some time. I'll give you an example. Some years ago, when the Charlie Hebdo matter took place, a dentist at the University of North Carolina, she's in a dental school, she's from India. She contacted a friend and said, can someone come and speak at the campus? to talk to the medical students and the dental students, because the head of the unit said that, Muslims have a problem, and there's a problem with Muslims on this question of blasphemy, and they kill people. Would you please come? So I asked her, what do you want me to say? She said, you need to explain the Islamic position. So I said, do you know what the Islamic position is? She said, well, the Islamic position is that when the Prophet was walking in the streets of Makkah, there was a woman who threw dirt on him every day. And one day she did not throw the dirt. And then he inquired, where is my enemy? And then he went to visit her. And she was so moved that this person whom she tried to insult and injure on a daily basis turned out to be so magnificent and so magnanimous in inquiring about her health. So she said, that is the Islam that I learned. And that is what this is. I told her, yes, that is the Islam that you learned at the feet and on the lap of your mother and your grandmother. But that is not the doctrine that is available in the textbooks that people read on what the position is on the question of blasphemy. And when I told her what the position is, she was very unhappy, and she did not move forward to invite me further, because I told her, I'm not going to tell the audience, the story of the way you have learned what the position on blasphemy is. I'm going to tell you what the historical doctrines have been, and I'm going to tell you and your audience what Muslims need to do and what the work remains for Muslim scholars, for Muslim communities on this topic to create a new position. Now, before we come to the issue at hand, before I come and elaborate 2 or 3 points and hand it over to my colleagues, I can always jump in later, is that obviously what is going on in France, from time to time in Denmark, in different parts of the world where Muslims feel insulted and so on, these are obviously deeply problematic and deeply injurious activities that are taking place. Their goal is clearly that they cannot deal with the political situation of Muslim minorities in Europe. And then this question of freedom of religion and freedom of expression becomes the number one issue. Unfortunately, President Macron, I thought that he was a fairly sensible fellow. He turned out also to have lost his marbles. I don't think, what's his name, President from Turkey, Professor Erdogan has been entirely wrong to say that Macron has lost his marbles. Something of that has happened. He's just gone completely crazy, and he started this issue even before these criminal acts took place, where people were knifed to death and people were beheaded. The teacher were beheaded. So that is these are criminal activities that are taking place, but the cover for these criminal activities that take place is a certain kind of Islamic doctrine. And the world out there thinks that if Muslims change their doctrine, this killing will stop. Not necessarily true. The criminals will continue to find any kind of justification to do their violence. It is not the question of the Islamic doctrine. The Islamic doctrine possibly affects Pakistan, Bangladesh, other Muslim countries much more deeply, who need to revisit this doctrine and its laws and its applications. But it is not the biggest issue for Muslims in the, at large, because most Muslims don't go out and killing each other on the questions of blasphemy. But there are places where this do happen, and you correctly pointed out these deep troubling issues. And I'm troubled from time to time. I've been writing on this topic for some time. I keep a close watch on Bangladesh and Pakistan and so on. And these unhappy events happen from time to time. And I'm afraid that the religious leadership in Pakistan, the political leadership in places like Pakistan, Bangladesh, everywhere, the Muslim religious leadership is silent, and they do not say anything. And in some ways, their silence is collusion, and they do not speak out clearly on this matter. But that is also because they are somewhat hamstrung by the historical position. They are hamstrung by the historical position, and for that, one needs an interpretation that will be commensurate with the time and the age in which we are living. 2 points. Blasphemy in different parts of the colonized world, that is today the Muslim world, blasphemy was introduced into the public sphere by colonial law. And in the subcontinent, colonial law tried to control the religion and introduce blasphemy laws. And when India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh became independent at various stages in their histories, these blasphemy laws were also then further accentuated and developed. In Pakistan in particular, it was further Islamized and so on. The historical doctrine is the following. So while most Muslim scholars give a position to say that Muslims do not kill blasphemers, they don't fully outline their position. And in my view, it's a very poor argument that is given. Historically, what has happened is that when the Prophet Muhammad conquered Mecca, a general amnesty was given, but a number of people, of individuals, were put on a list that they had given offense and they should be executed even if they hang on to the curtains of the Kaaba and ask for repentance. Now, some of those people, when they petitioned the Prophet, they were taken off the list and they were pardoned. Others were executed. The question there is, what was their crime? There are two interpretations for that crime. Some say that they had committed other offenses, such as homicide or something else, and therefore they are punished for those offenses. So it was a question of law and order being established. Another interpretation is that, no, their primary offense was satire and insult to the Prophet. And now that the Prophet is the political leader, that would no longer be tolerated. But as I said, some were executed, about 4, and 2 petitioned for pardoning and given amnesty. So despite the original teaching, that action of the execution of people who insult the Prophet makes insult to the Prophet an exceptional theological offense. It's not like ordinary blasphemy. It becomes an exceptional political offense. And historically, especially in the 14th century, 2 major scholars, Ibn Taymiyyah and Subki, wrote extensive books on this topic, arguing that insult to the Prophet requires the execution of such offenders. And various caliphs saw themselves as taking the office that was held by the Prophet politically, not in terms of prophecy, but as holding the position. And therefore, various political leaders deemed themselves as being responsible for the honor and the key symbols of Islam. And one of the key symbols of Islam is the honor of the Prophet ﷺ, on whom peace and blessings. And therefore, violence and any kind of offense will not be tolerated. How many such people were executed and killed? We don't know too much about that. What we do know is that people who made claims to be prophets or were becoming Sufis, who made all kinds of extraordinary claims, they were executed for other reasons, but not necessarily do we know. However, some people who were engaged in certain actions of zandaqa, for instance, that someone who claims to be Muslim but has other kinds of views, those would also be executed from time to time. I'm not talking about numbers in the hundreds, we're talking about dozens, okay? And they were also, another point is that this precedent of the Prophet, big question about that. Is that precedent exclusively only in the hands of the Prophet, and only the Prophet could have done that, and it no longer applies to anybody else? And that is possibly the view that most sensible scholars would take. However, others believe that no, that precedent is binding on subsequent generations. And therefore, Ibn Taymiyyah and Subki and others understood it in that way. The question that we are faced with today is the following. that these are not texts and these are not teachings that have absolute and categorical clarity as to what it is. These are not categorical, clear. It's the Quran says, don't insult people, talks about people who are offending the Prophet. They will be dealt with in a particular way in the hereafter. But there's no penalty in the Quran. But obviously, Muslims don't only take penalty from the Quran. There's also hadith and sunnah and so on and so forth. But this question of the penalty for insult to the Prophet, the big question is it exclusively the prerogative of the Prophet to have done so and no longer applicable, or others who understand it to be applicable? The question is, even if you understand it to be applicable, the question is that this is something that Muslims call mujtahad fihi, something that has been subject to juristic interpretation. It is a result, it's a conclusion, it's a verdict reached by intellectual effort. And anything that is reached by intellectual effort can be reviewed in light of new circumstances. And the question is, what is the great public interest that is attained by holding the view of executing people who insult the Prophet? How is the Muslims' best interest, globally and otherwise, being served by such a position? Let me also inform you, my good friend, Dr. Ammar Khan Nasir, for instance, from Pakistan, had already shown in his research that the early Hanafi school, for instance, the early Hanafi school, viewed insult to the Prophet to be equivalent to just another act of apostasy. And like any other act of apostasy, you give the apostate an opportunity to recant. You can recant. But unfortunately, the early Hanafis also were later on subdued and were convinced to join the other schools of Sunni law and also Shia law, to join them in this position of viewing insult to the Prophet as an exceptional offense, and therefore it has the severest punishment. But my argument is that does not have to be so. There could be a different position. Muslims must think about their own image. They must think about their major responsibility to do da'wah, to provide the message of Islam to others in a way that people have a great understanding that Islam is a religion of values. Islam does not coerce people into belief. If people want to leave the faith, then they are free to do so. If they want to join the faith, they are free to do so. And therefore, Muslims need to consider, and Muslim scholars and communities need to consider the new maslahah, the best interest to the Muslim community, and review this and many other rules that we have in our books. Unfortunately, this issue has become a litmus test between different Muslim factions. So in the subcontinent, I know, for instance, the Barelvis hold up this flag much more strongly than others, and then they subdue the Deobandis that really love the Prophet, then they are forced to join, and the Sunnis do that to the Shias, and the Shias do. So it's become a highly politicized and volatile issue within the Muslim community as who loves the Prophet most. And therefore, as Brother Faizur Rahman has explained, all the political drama that takes place, and very terrible drama that takes place in Bangladesh, where a person was mentally ill, did something wrong, a mob lynched him. In Pakistan, people are killed on the way and back to the courts when they're accused of that. This is horrible. And no sensible community should be doing this. Unfortunately, passions are extremely high. If you're a scholar and you say this, then lay people are going to stop you in the tracks. Lay people are going to stop you in the tracks and say, you do not love the Prophet, or you are in the payroll of the Americans, or whatever they want to say. That's unfortunately the situation. So there is no sober conversation on this matter. There is no sober conversation on this matter. I don't think one can also discuss this issue in the environment that we have right now, because it comes to a great cost to those who are speaking. They can be harmed, they can be injured, and worse. So this is extremely delicate matter, must be dealt with extremely responsibly. Unfortunately, these people in the West and people elsewhere in the world who try and taunt Muslims are succeeding because they are playing to the passions of Muslims, and Muslims are giving them on a daily basis, both Muslim religious leaders and the Muslim public. And the Muslim public. This is not only and the Muslim public who are being manipulated by demagogues. And in these protests, people among the Muslims die in the protests. They die in their tens and in their dozens in different places. And they become cannon fodder to police. In Afghanistan, several years ago, Hamid Karzai became the big defender of Islam and objected to the Americans desecrating the Quran. And he made a public statement about the passions rose. 3 days later, the public then overran a UN facility, killed several people in the UN facility. Then that very angry public went onto the streets, and Karzai's police shot those people in their dozens and killed them in the name of law and order. So you need to be extremely careful about how Muslim political leaders, Muslim religious leaders, and the Muslim public are playing this issue. This has become now a clash of civilizations issue. And Pankaj Mishra wrote an article that I posted on my Facebook. It's a wonderful article. This that Macron is turning this into a clash of civilizations issue. It is not a clash of civilizations issue. It's about a question of civility. It's a question of civility. Can you be civil about other people's sacred objects? And Macron, unfortunately, has missed that lesson. So has Charlie Hebdo. So has the various newspapers in Europe, Jyllands Posten and others who have done that. They've lost the message of civility, and similar lack of civility amongst Muslim political leaders and also Muslim religious leaders who have also lost the message of civility. So what we have is barbarity in the name of religion taking place and barbarity in the name of civilization taking place. And we need to call it out for what it is. Thank you. These are my 10 minutes.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Professor Moosa. Of course, I mean, you really correctly contextualized it. However, I mean, my difference with those hadiths or those reports, historical reports where the Prophet is supposed to have executed somebody for satirizing him, and are questionable, because we can't keep them as the basis to kill people today. As you know, most of the hadiths were compiled about 200 years later. Even Ibn Ishaq, the earliest historian, compiled it several decades after all those events, and most of them were Maghazi events. I mean, the authenticity, the sciences of the hadiths were not fully developed, and most of them are of very dubious authenticity.
Brother Faiz, if you want to go into this, there's an opportunity to go into this. But yeah, you on the minority side in making that argument. But the majority has a very detailed and explicit argument that is historical, and you cannot just wish it away. That requires a new interpretation, and you're not going to win because then if you're going to start attacking the veracity and the authenticity of hadith, then a whole number of issues about how do you pray, how do you have your fast, all those are going to be implicated. So I think that requires a much more detailed, sophisticated. You cannot deal with these issues in those kinds of issues in such in a way that that's going to cause more injury. So that's a much more. No, I don't think those hadith are questionable. Those hadith are not questionable because these are historical fact. The hadith are not questionable. The interpretation of those hadith and what they mean, are those only exclusively the prerogative of the Prophet to have done those actions, or is there something else? I think also Muslims misunderstand the image of the Prophet. The Prophet is both a political figure and also a religious prophet. And that is the status of the Prophet Muhammad. So there's certain things that he does as a political leader that might not necessarily be what he does as a messenger of God. And there has been historical confusion about these various roles of the Prophet. So I think I'm happy to have that conversation with you, but I think let's hear from the other two scholars, and then we can jump into those details.
No, certainly the idea was not to bring that up now, but just it was a reference in passing. But my point was to say that we shouldn't shy away from challenging those positions. I know there should be larger debate, and perhaps it's subject of another meeting. That's what I meant to say. In my opinion, when I have some doubts with that, I have some problems with that. Anyway, now we will ask Professor Mustafa Akyol to take over from here.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. And good afternoon and good morning to you all. Thanks for joining us. I agree with most points raised by Dr. Moosa. I'm proud to be on the same panel with him and Ahmet, two important colleagues and friends whose work are indeed very valuable. And this is a timely issue. Faizur, thanks for holding this panel. We are obviously having this conversation in the light of the terrible events.
Yes.
So in France, terrorist attacks we all condemn. But this is also, we should remember that this is an issue that's been on the world's agenda, let's say, since the 80s, with the publication of the Satanic Verses, that novel by, I forgot his name for a second.
Salman Rushdie you're talking about.
Salman Rushdie, yeah, Salman Rushdie.
Yes,
and
yeah.
he was given a death fatwa famously by
Yes,
Ayatollah Khomeini, and
yeah.
and then this issue in the West started. You know, oh, are Muslims? Some of them are willing to punish disrespect to Islam by murder, by violence, and I suspect that we have seen more disrespect to our Prophet, peace be upon him, because of the death fatwas or the terroristic attacks. Because once you say to people, especially people in societies who are proud of their freedom, you cannot say this, more people begin to say that. So we're in this counterproductive, vicious cycle. But as you well pointed out, the issue is not just between Islam or Muslims and France or Muslims and the West. We have blasphemy laws in Muslim majority societies, at least a dozen of them. And some of them are quite harsh. In Pakistan, thousands have been killed or jailed first. I mean, not killed, jailed. And several people have been killed by vigilante violence because of accusations of blasphemy, which were most of the time not even true. You know, so this is a problem, and I think this will continue to be a problem. And therefore, we Muslims have to confront this issue. And one way to confront this issue is to criticize double standards in the West, in particular France. I am very critical of the French laïcité, which doesn't show full respect to religious freedom. France has also its own secular blasphemy laws. I mean, insulting the flag or the national anthem is a crime in France. Insulting the president in France was a criminal offense until 2013, when the European Court of Human Rights pushed for France to abolish that law. So France is not the best country to lecture the world about freedom of speech because it has its own double standards. I think Holocaust denial, banning Holocaust denial is another example. Holocaust denial to me is a ridiculous and disrespectful thing, but it's still an idea, and you should counter that or you should ignore that. I should say that such laws do not exist in the United States or United Kingdom or Canada. I don't know Quebec, but the rest of Canada, because the Anglo-Saxon countries have a higher, I think, generally standard of free speech, and I think that's better. But the point is, we can endlessly discuss about the French colonial crimes in Algeria, their double standards and this and that. That's a valid position. But what do we Muslims think about this issue is important. And also that's the only thing we can change. I mean, I'm not going to change the behavior of the French Republic directly, but I can have a conversation among Muslims about how we should look at this issue of blasphemy. And there, I do believe, yes, we have to get into issues of jurisprudence, fiqh, because we have certain verdicts in our traditional jurisprudence schools which say sab al-Rasul, or insult of the Prophet. And interestingly, insult of the Prophet has been elevated to higher than anything else, sometimes even insult of God himself or other prophets, because he's the leader of the Muslim community historically. So it is a capital offense. So that has been established in jurisprudence. And when you have that in your jurisprudence, and also a culture comes out of that. That goes into practice in Pakistan by putting people in jail for illicit acts of blasphemy. That goes in practice in France as well, because I think the murderers who attack people at church, for example, in France, yes, there are sociological enfranchised. I'm sure they feel alienated by French society. So there are a lot of cultural, social issues. But I wouldn't be surprised to look into their mindset and see the commandment to execute this blasphemy. So I think fiqh, jurisprudence, is important, and the culture built around it is important. That's why I've written several articles, and a small part of my earlier book, Islam Without Extremes, was on this issue. A full chapter of my forthcoming book is on this issue, the blasphemy issue. And I say, well, let's rethink this issue. And one point that is really, really important is that there is absolutely nothing in the Quran about killing people for blasphemy. Just like the case with apostasy. Apostasy laws do not come from the Quran. It comes from the post-Quranic literature. What is there in the Quran? Well, first of all, when you read the Quran just from this perspective, you see verses which tell us that blasphemy will exist, and we should not be surprised that it exists. For example, one of the relevant verses, Al Imran 186, says, "You are sure to hear much that is hurtful from those who were given the scripture before you, and from those associate others with God." That is the Ahlul Kitab and the Mushrikun. So it is sure that we will hear hurtful words. We wish it didn't happen, but the Quran says you will hear these words. And what does it say? If you're steadfast and mindful of God, that is the best course. It doesn't say go and silence those people or kill those people. There's another verse which is even more clear on what to do, repeated twice actually in the Quran. It says, if you hear people denying and ridiculing God's revelation, that is the Quran, do not sit with them unless they start to talk of other things, or else you yourself will become like them. What does the verse say? When you hear people mocking Islam, mocking God's revelation, are you supposed to silence them? Are you supposed to punish them, execute them? No, it says do not sit with them. So it tells Muslims to refrain from people who are disrespectful, which I think in the modern world can be practiced by not buying a newspaper if it is disrespectful to you, not following a website, not engaging in a conversation with people who are hostile. You can refrain from them. You can protest them as well, but it doesn't speak about silencing them. There's actually nothing in the Quran about silencing people on this because they're disrespectful. As Dr. Moosa said, the verdict on blasphemy, of execution of blasphemers, comes from Hadith and Sirah, the biography of the Prophet. And there are accounts, he mentioned the ones about after the conquest of Mecca, that's true, by I think 630 AD. And also, even before that, there have been a few individuals in Medina, when Muslims were the dominant group in Medina, that were executed. One is Ka'b ibn Ashraf, famous. He was from the Banu Nadir tribe in Medina, a Jewish tribe. And he was a satirical poet, and he had written satirical lines. So Muslims have taken these episodes of execution of these people as the basis for establishing the blasphemy law. But when you, when Dr. Moosa made the distinction, and I think we can see this in most cases, when you look into the story of Ka'b ibn al-Ashraf, for example, you see that, yes, he was a satirical poet, so he wrote offensive, nasty words. He didn't write, he recited at the time. It was an oral tradition. But then he also went to Mecca and incited Quraysh to wage war on Muslims, the Uhud war, the Battle of Uhud. So, okay, so it was not just poetry, it was what scholar Hashim Kemali calls war propaganda. So you write something, but you say you tell something in a way that you incite violence. There are reports of him physically attacking Muslims when they open a tent in the marketplace of Medina as well. So when you look into all these things, you get the picture that it was not maybe just not satire, but those people were active and enemies of Islam. There's another individual who was executed, but he had attacked a Muslim caravan and injured two Muslim women. And I think we should understand the political context of 7th century, early 7th century Arabia. There were tribes, there were arrangements between them, peace agreements. If there was no peace agreement, it was by definition an enemy. And when you recited something that is waging war against the other side, that in itself was an act of enmity. So therefore, we should understand that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, acted in this universe, sometimes according to the rules of that game, but not everything there might be eternally valid for Muslims. And I think for that, we should go back to the Quran, and because the Quran establishes, I think, universal standards of Islam. If you want to imitate everything the Prophet did, you can end up with a defense of slavery. You can end up, I mean, from the incident of Banu Qurayza, you can argue for, let's say, collective punishment, which are things that Muslims generally don't defend anymore. So I think we should distinguish that. And also we should remind that ourselves that there are also stories of Prophet Muhammad not punishing insulters. In a famous, again, story, some Jews in Medina, and this incident is, by the way, reported or alluded in the Quran. Instead of saying Salamun Alaikum, they were saying Assalamu Alaikum, which means death be upon you, which is a play on words, and it was an insult. And actually, some of the Sahaba got enraged with this. They said, should we do something? You know, should we attack them? And Prophet said, no, just say peace, the same unto you too. In another version of the same story, Prophet Muhammad said, be gentle and calm. Allah likes gentleness in all affairs. So we have also these stories of Prophet actually not punishing people, not going after people when they were rude or offensive, if they were just offensive and it was not a war propaganda and it was not instigating war. So I think we Muslims need a conversation on this, and we should come to the position that we do not kill people or put people in jail for blasphemy. That is the case in Pakistan. That's the case. That should be the case in Europe. Of course, this doesn't mean condoning it. And I don't think when we have this rule, millions will come out blaspheming against the Prophet. I mean, Muslims have this idea sometimes that when you don't ban something and when you lift the ban, it will happen in droves. I think quite the contrary. When we take a more relaxed position on this, actually we might see less offense to our Prophet. We might see less disrespect to Islam, because we will be showing the mercy of Islam. We will be showing the gentleness of our Prophet. We will be showing the tolerance of our tradition, which is by in itself something that raises respect. One more thing. Also, what is insult? What is offense? It is clear, you know, when you make a very ugly cartoon in itself, it is an offense. But there might be our own teachings that will be offensive to other people. I mean, we don't make cartoons. It's not in our culture. It's not in the Muslim culture. But although, you know, you can find it around the Muslim world, of course. There are statements in the Quran about the mushrikun, which will be offensive to someone who really worships idols today, right? Actually, one of the reasons that the Prophet was persecuted in Mecca was that he offended the mushrikun. We have this statement by the elders of Mecca coming to the uncle of Prophet, and they say, your nephew has insulted our gods. Who were those gods? Allat, Manat, and Uzza, the great idols that the mushrikun were worshipping. So it is true that the Quran says, do not insult their gods directly so you don't provoke more offense. But even the very fact that you declare them as false gods, which Muslims did and the Quran did, was an offense to the polytheists of Mecca. So today we should understand that, I mean, there are passages of the Quran on Jews or the Christian, Trinity doctrine, the doctrine of Trinity, which, or about like the Kafirun. I mean, you say they're like worse than animals and they will burn in hell. So that is not in the eyes of those people, they can find these passages offensive. And there have been people in Europe who say, let's ban the Quran by showing these passages. Who are these? These are the Islamophobes, like the Dutch politician Geert Wilders. So therefore, I think since it is highly relative, hence we also need freedom of speech to be able to have our teachings clearly, articulated and explained in situations where we don't have power, like in Europe. I think we Muslims should come to a more relaxed position on this and say, we respect our prophet, we don't condone disrespect to our prophet, we can protest it, but we're not going to use violence, and that's not right. And I think coming to a position like this, an ijma, which the Ummah did on slavery, will be one of the important steps that we can take as Muslims. And as I said, I think that will lead not to more insults, but quite the contrary, less insults to Islam and more respect to our beloved prophet.
Yeah, thank you, Akyol. I think you're absolutely right. We Muslims must take a relaxed position and completely shun any kind of violence or justify any kind of violence in the name of Islam, or using past narratives or reports which have multiple interpretations. For instance, I said about Ka'b bin Ashraf, who was the satirical poet of the time of the Banu Nazir tribe. The other interpretation is he had joined hands with the Meccans who had wanted to eliminate the Muslims in Medina, even after the Prophet had signed a treaty with them called the the so-called Constitution of Medina. Soon after he entered Medina, he signed the treaty. So in violation of the treaty, he had supported as a war propaganda. He was playing a fifth columnist there. So perhaps that is one interpretation. But then some of these people who use violence use the first interpretation to say that he was killed purely for satirizing the Prophet, which is a bit problematic. Therefore, we Muslims must take a relaxed position. Had the Prophet done so, that would have been against the Quran. When the Quran very clearly says that do not even insult other deities, the question of killing others for satirizing the Prophet does not arise at all. So therefore, we Muslims, as you rightly said, must take a relaxed position on that. I fully agree with you. I think now it's time for Ahmed to say a few words on this. Thank you for your patience, Ahmed.
Alaikum salam, Faizur. Thanks for organizing. Great speeches by Ebrahim and Mustafa. They mention important dimensions. I will just want to emphasize three things. One is that when we look at the world today, out of 200 countries, 49 of them are Muslim majority. And 32 Muslim majority countries have blasphemy laws. 6 of them have capital punishment. And the result is devastating. In Pakistan, no one has been executed yet, but 70 people have been lynched and 1,500 people have been arrested and put in jails and see a certain level of persecution. So this is the reality we are seeing from France to Pakistan, from individual to state level, and we have to deal with this problem. Is this only government states? It's not. Unfortunately, 3 groups or activists have been propagated on this issue. What are these 3 groups? Islamists, from Ikhwan to many Jamaat Islamiyya, many Islamic groups. Ulama, the Islamic scholars, from Turkey's Diyanet members to Al-Azhar to many other Islamic ulama. And the third, and shockingly, Sufi sheikhs. And we've been told and we've been thinking that Sufis are tolerant, open-minded, have a broad vision, but unfortunately, even in Turkey, Sufi tariqas appear to be very close-minded, very traditionalist on this issue of apostasy and blasphemy. What is the result? The result is heartbreaking. The result is that according to 2013 Pew survey, in 3 regions, subcontinent, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East, over 50% of people support embracing Sharia as the law of land. And among the supporters of Sharia, 75% in Southeast Asia, 50% in the Middle East, 25% in subcontinent support the killing of apostate and the blasphemous. So this is a very deep social acceptance and support, which did not exist 50, 60 years ago. As a result of the propaganda of ulama in mosques, Sufi sheikhs in tariqas, Islamists in party rallies, they convince the Muslim masses about this issue. So this is the problem on 2 major points. Let me briefly explain. 1, from the 8th to 12th century, Muslims were superior to Western Europeans in science and economy. When Muslims had libraries with hundreds of thousands of books, Western Europeans had only a few hundred books in their libraries. Western Europe was 5 centuries later than Muslims to produce paper. Western Europe did not have a city like Baghdad, did not have a philosopher like Ibn Sina. Even Ghazali, who criticized, challenged, and helped the decline of this intellectual dynamism, was a product of dynamism. That's why the Muslim world, after the 11th century, had very few examples of philosophers like Ibn Sina or Islamic scholars like Ghazali. And when it comes today, we have very few Nobel Prize winners. We have very few world-renowned intellectuals. We have very few world-renowned artists. Muslim world today is full of countries with authoritarianism. In terms of literacy rate, in terms of life expectancy and GNI per capita, it is below the world averages. Comparing the Muslim world today with Western Europe, it's passé. Competition is no longer even possible. But comparing with Latin America, comparing with East Asia, show that Muslims' position is worse than them. So once leading the world in philosophy and economy, we are now in the law of the lowest, and the PISA scores, which is the global test of secondary high school students. Out of 90 countries, East Asians are at the top 10, Muslims at the bottom 20. Are these coincidence? They are not. Because in a country, you cannot speak the truth. In a country, there is no freedom of speech. In a country that you criticize anything about the religion, anything about the state, you're either killed as an apostate or a blasphemous, or put in jail, or declared as a kafir. An ad hominem attack is a part of our daily life. Unfortunately, it began by ad hominem attacks to Ibn Sina, to Farabi, to Ibn Rushd, all the Greek Muslim philosophers having learning Greek science and making their contributions. And there is the double standards, there's hypocrisy. Why? Because when Muslims are asked why and how they did not produce world-renowned scholars, they say, oh, we have many. Even Sayyid Qutb, in his horrible books, Milestones, says that Muslims had better philosophers than Western Europeans. So when it comes to defense, you give the names of Ibn Sina, Farabi, Biruni, and others. But can these people live in a Muslim majority country freely today? Can the medical scientist Razi, not the faqih or tafsir mufassir, can live today? No. Razi, the medical scientist, philosophers, cannot leave Pakistan today, cannot live in Bangladesh today. So the fact that we have now authoritarian regimes, socioeconomic underdevelopment, intellectual stagnation is directly connected to the idea of killing apostate, punishing blasphemy, no freedom of thought, no dynamism. The ulama-state alliance, which did not exist before the 11th century. After the 11th century, with Nizamiya madrasas and everything, ulama established a partnership with the state. Now we see in Turkey, in Pakistan, in Egypt, they are together, representing political and religious monopoly, hegemony, domination. So this is the second part. And finally, so as I try to explain that this blasphemy, apostasy issues, unfortunately, propagated by ulama, by Sufi sheikhs, by Islamists, have now social basis, which kill the intellectual dynamism, and we have the vicious circle of authoritarianism, violence, and underdevelopment. And in order to solve the problem, I totally agree with Ebrahim and Mustafa that we need new interpretations, if possible, an ijma. But the last point is that the image of Islam in the West, or image of Islam, let alone the West. Okay, the West is Islamophobic. They hate us. Okay, that's fine. But look at your new generation. Will you be able to teach Islam to your children? Are we going to be able to tell our grandchildren, etc., that Islam is the religion of peace? Islam coexists with democracy. Islam coexists with liberalism. In Turkey, Mustafa and I and people like ourselves, we debated against secularists for decades. We said that Islam is perfectly fine with democracy. The Kemalists who support the Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's position and the assertive secularist position say, no, you are wrong. You don't know what you're talking about. You will see when they come to power, they will destroy democracy. And this perception is dominant, even in my country, United States. When people talk to me, they are kind people. They don't want to offend. But in the mindset of many Western people, Islam has problems in terms of living in a democratic, liberal country. Why do they think that way? Is this because of just racism, colonial mindset? No, because when they look at the Muslim world, when they see the people saying that blasphemous should be punished, apostate should be killed, they say, where's the freedom of speech? Where's the freedom of conscience? And as I said, if we even forget about the Western people, the young Muslims in Turkey, in Iran, in Pakistan, in India, there are now many opportunities to learn about religion and politics. They have the internet. If they don't brainwashed in a specific circle of madrasa, jamaat, etc., many of them are leaving Islam. Look, Conversation just published an article about Iran with the argument that 55% of Iranians says they are no longer Muslim. They say, oh, this is a disputable, controversial data. Okay, if not 55, let's say 45. If 35 of Iranians says they are no longer Muslim, isn't it shocking? Isn't it more important than any discussion about the interpretation of this hadith, etc.? So this is the fact, reality, and time is passing. We are losing. And Muslims really is living in history. The real life today is full of shocking examples. And let me conclude saying that this is the reality on the ground, not only laws and state, but people's perceptions really embracing this very wrong idea of punishing those who have different ideas. This is wrong because it makes us underdeveloped. We no longer are able to produce intellectuals and economic entrepreneurs. And the image is getting worse and worse in the West. And the image in the mindset of our children are getting very negative. And let me conclude with a joke at 5:30 a.m. in San Diego. So in Germany, a group of Muslims tried to convert a German fellow, Hans. Hans was a nice guy. He said, yes, I want to be Muslim. Then everything was said, a ceremony of kalima shahadat, etc. Then they say, you need circumcision. What is circumcision? You didn't teach me. They said, we are going to cut a little bit from your penis. He said, no, I don't want to cut. No. They say, no, you should. You become a Muslim. They say, no, I'm leaving your religion. They say, oh, then we will kill you. So this is a joke, a tragic joke, but it tells many things. Yeah, I'm very happy to be in this panel and very grateful for Faizur and very thankful for Ebrahim and Mustafa for this conversation.
That's absolutely, I think I couldn't agree with you more. When we talk about the Western hypocrisy, we should also at the same time talk about the Muslim hypocrisy. Today, many people like you cannot live in Turkey. People like Mustafa cannot live in Turkey. People like, in fact, I briefly saw Al Mawrid Institute joining the discussion. I think perhaps Javed Ahmad Ghamidi also joined the discussion briefly. So he's a Pakistani. He cannot live in Pakistan because he's a liberal scholar. So the problem is we are hypocritical ourselves. So how do we actually tackle our own hypocrisy? We don't just want to do that too. So any debate on this also must include our own hypocrisy. I entirely agree with you. And I think in this context, your book, Islam, Authoritarianism, and Underdevelopment is very crucial. So thank you, Ahmed, for flagging this issue of our own hypocrisy. That's a very valid point. And I think I had thought that we will have another brief discussion among us, but since we have exceeded 1 hour, I thought we should now, instead of having a conversation among ourselves, it will be better if we open it up for Q&A. So if anybody who wants to ask a question may raise their hands or just unmute and ask.